I'll go into the best DM that I've had. And there's a guy called Stefan. Is it possible to truly know anything, or is knowledge just a belief that we accept to be true? Now, that is a big question, and I lean very strongly towards knowledge just being a belief that we accept as true. But I thought about it, and I present both sides of the argument. So, is it possible to know anything? Here's the arguments. You've got things like science, reason, logic, proof, evidence, things like this. And you hear something like a fact, something factually true, like we're 99% similar to chimpanzees, or whatever it is.
Genetically,
Yeah, genetically. And or this place is in the 70% poverty, or this medicine will make you feel more calm. But then even with this, it's like, okay, for the medicine example, everyone's body's different, so there will be exceptions. For the statistic about poverty, for example, all they've done is taken a sample of 10,000 people, and then they kind of replicate that for a whole city, and so it's kind of, it got imperfections. And for the 99% identical to a chimp example, I mean, I don't really feel like 99% identified with a chimp. So yeah, that's, but I think that's probably the strongest argument for do we know something, and it's this objective kind of thing we spoke about in previous episodes of, yes, these things are true because they boil down to the laws of physics, and you can't change the laws of physics. So then there's also Descartes, who famously said,
think therefore I am.
Yeah, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. And it holds a lot of weight, and it's basically, the theory behind it is, if we can doubt everything, the fact of doubting means that I'm thinking, and if I'm thinking, then I must exist informed in order to be doubting. And so we know that we like, according to that, we know we exist. So we can know that, we can know it. And yeah, for me, they're the two strongest. I'll just let you comment if you wanted to before I move on to the other side.
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of evidence, like you say, and I think it differs between people how we evaluate the strength of a piece of evidence. So, are you very scientifically, materialistically minded, and you go, right, if it's been demonstrated using the scientific method that these things, or these laws, or this phenomena objectively exists in the world, then you believe it. And it's like, you know that. You believe it with 100% certainty, or 99.999% certainty, whereas some people consider evidence to be how one feels. If you feel like there is a higher power or some sort of metaphysical force in the universe, then that's enough evidence for you to then believe it, and then it tips. I think there's a tipping point. Let's say, put it in a term of percentages, where you feel like you surpass a certain percentage of strength in evidence to the point where you say you'd know something rather than you believe it. So like, I don't know, like the laws of physics, there's so much evidence that exists, and it would be absurd to disagree with it. You would feel it's absurd, your society would feel it's absurd, you'd be ostracized for believing that, and so you say you know it, you feel like you know it. Where there are some things like conspiracy theories, for example, where does the strength of evidence really reach over that tipping point? Like, is it absurd to not believe it? Well, probably not. So you kind of you look at the evidence, and it doesn't quite surpass that limit where you go, okay, I know that thing is true. With things that we take as facts, I think it's because the evidence is so strong that it surpasses that tipping point where if we didn't believe it, we would think we're crazy, or we would be considered crazy by society. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The other side of things that I think holds a lot more weight is the Socratic philosophy of the more I know, the less I know. And one big thing that I know we've discussed before is cognitive biases. And I've got some lines that I read recently that Nietzsche says about it. People are going to start saying, "You're so Nietzsche heavy," and I know we are. But I go to the coffee shop, I read 2 pages, and I think about it for an hour. So
we're always biased by the thing that we're learning at the moment. Like that's always going to be. So,
so he says, our eyes find it easier on a given occasion to produce a picture already often produced than to seize upon the divergence and novelty of an impression. It is difficult and painful for the ear to hear anything new. When we hear another language, we involuntarily attempt to form the sounds into words which we are more familiar with. The reader nowadays reads all the single words. He takes 5 of every 20 and guesses the probably appropriate sense to them. So what that kind of means is we rely on things we're familiar with, and kind of have them as a filter on the world through the stories that we tell ourselves. Mm-hmm. And it's said nicely and poetically through the senses. That's why I quite like that. Mm-hmm. And then he also says about the chapter I'm reading at the moment is called something to do with scholars, and he talks about this learned man who is someone who just accepts that something is that he knows something for sure, that he like this sort of scientific arguments. So the learned man is full of petty envy, and he has a lynx eye for the weak points in those natures to whose elevations he cannot attain. The lynx eye implies this kind of heightened awareness, so an ability to spot flaws in others. And these are flaws in those who have not ascended to a higher status morally or socially. The learned man is confiding, yet only as one who lets himself go but does not flow. When he shares and opens up, but is not free-flowing expression of himself, it's a limited, calculated release. So he kind of holds back thoughts, and perhaps in this sort of sense of fear or pride, or a sort of desire to maintain control. And practically, what does kind of all this mean that we should do practically? I think we should be this free-flowing individual of kind of accepting that we don't know anything. And the trouble is we're not really at peace ever, because there's all these values that kind of compete against each other in this fragmented culture. And there's this quote: "Such a man of late culture and broken lights will be on average a weak man." So all these kind of values compete against each other, the broken light symbolizing kind of a weak leading principle. And his fundamental desire is that the war within him should come to an end. I think there's a lot of people where there's just too many competing values that they don't have a North Star to properly follow. There wasn't really an argument against the belief that we accept it's true, but I think there's some points of, I don't think you want to become this guy that does just believe things and not kind of question things and tailor it towards what you actually think, and not to be able to think for yourself.
The thing is, you need a perceptive framework to view your life. You need a story to tell yourself. You need a map for the territory, because you're one little mortal individual, and you're not ready to see or to feel or to perceive the territory and the massive complexity that is the world, and it is human life, and it is this universe. So you need that. You need a framework to live your life within. A set of core beliefs, a set of core principles of what you think's going on here, who the hell you think you are, what you're supposed to do, what matters. You need that cookie cutter, because that stops you from being anxious and stops you from going crazy, literally. But you must. I think it's important, and this is maybe what philosophy is about, and what discussions like we have on this podcast are about, is you have to recognize that that is where you live. You live in a perceptive framework for the world. You live within your own map. You don't live in the territory. And just an understanding that that's the case means that you can be open just slightly for that map and that narrative to change slightly as a consequence of experience. And that's really important too. That's what growth is. That's what self-discovery is. You don't want to burn the map completely. That's what sort of, I don't know, that's what mental disorder is in a lot of ways, is your map gets blown apart by trauma or by conditions like schizophrenia, etc., etc. But you do want, you kind of want to, you want a capacity for your map to evolve and to change, and be a bit, formless, be like water, as Jackie Chan said. Or Bruce Lee. That's Bruce Lee, not Jackie Chan. That's he's an actor. What Bruce Lee said about being like water and being able to sort of hold shape, but then change and evolve. So